It's Karen again. This time we're going to discuss Ella Draper. Ella Gareeva Draper is her full name, including her Russian maiden name. Now, she was the mother, is the mother of the two children who were at the center of the Hampstead Satanic ritual abuse hoax. And she has a very interesting history herself. The other day we talked about Abraham Christie, her now ex-partner, but at the time of the hoax he was her partner. But today we're going to find out a bunch of things about Ella that really have not been discussed very much by the alternative media, quote unquote. And so we're going to start back in the 1990s with Ella. That is when she was living in Russia. She had in Moscow, I believe. She had just graduated from from Moscow University as with a master's degree in art history, and she met Mr. Draper there. I don't know how she met him. I don't know if anyone knows that really. I don't think she's ever discussed it, and that's okay. In 1997, they had their child, who we are not going to name, even though he is above legal age. I don't think it's fair to bring his name into this. And in 1999, she and Mr. Draper got married. Ella's relationship with Mr. Draper only lasted a few years. In 2003, we find her in London, and at this point, she's got together with the father of her two children, who would later go on to be the focus of the Hampstead Satanic ritual abuse hoax. So the children were actually born in 2005 and 2006. The couple had separated by, I believe it was 2006. And as Mrs. Justice Poffley said in her judgment in 2015, there was not a time when their relationship ran smoothly after they had broken up. The child access issues continued. There were multiple court orders put out that said that Ella had to allow her ex to have contact with the children, and each time she would just ignore them. So there was a back and forth to court. There were also a number of issues. In 2008, so by that time her children would have been 2 and 3 years old approximately, there was a CIN order placed upon them by social services. CIN stands for Children in Need, and this was because they had been noticed scavenging food, and they appeared to be underfed and malnourished, and so there was a social services intervention at that time. There was another social service intervention in 2013, when, as Ella claimed, a neighbor had reported her. Now, we don't actually know whether the neighbor reported her, and she actually admitted that she wasn't certain that it was the neighbor who had reported her. However, what the neighbor said was that the children were left outside in their underpants, and were cold and crying. And apparently this was sufficient to bring social services to her door. The reason these are important, and we mention this stuff not because every parent should be perfect, but simply because this is the source of some of the victims of the hoax. The woman that she believed reported her, she later would claim was a member of the satanic cult. The social services workers who intervened and tried to help the children, she also named as people who were involved in this alleged cult. And that is just the way Ella organized things when they decided to do the cult. I guess they decided, hey, everyone who's ever annoyed us is going on this list. So Ella made a number of allegations in various attempts to stop her ex from having access to the two children. And this goes back way back into, like, from the very beginning when they were first separated. She made allegations that he had assaulted her, that she had assaulted her, sorry, that he had assaulted her older son, that he had assaulted her mother, that he had attempted to murder her mother, that he had tried to assault the two children, that he had sexually abused the two children. None of these ever stood up in court, and court orders were always given to her ex to say that he could have access to the children. However, she managed to thwart each court order as it came up, and by the time the hoax began, as we mentioned in our second video, I believe it was, her ex and Ella had met, and they had exchanged court orders. She was saying she wanted to apply to go and live in the south of France, and he was saying, no way, you can't do that. I would like to be able to have access to my children, because he was well aware that if she was out of the country, he would completely lose access. So that's where it stood by the time Abraham Christie came on the scene. Ella had done everything she could to block access, and the accusations that her ex was the leader of a satanic cult was going to be her final trump card. That was going to be the thing that would really do him in, and he would never have access again, or so she thought. In our video about Abraham, we talked about how he planned to use the videos that he and Ella made of the two children as a sales gimmick to sell his hemp, his hemp products and his expertise as a quote-unquote nutritionist. And we talked a little bit about how he and Ella started a company called Raw Hemp Stars. They started that company in late June of 2014. However, it's interesting to note that even before that time, in May of that year, they had begun referring to themselves as Raw Hemp Stars. So it's quite clear that at that time, even quite early in their relationship, shortly after they had met, they were already discussing starting that business. Now, we don't know whether that was when they began to get the idea of using the children as, as sort of living testimony of the power of hemp to cure trauma-based mind control. But we do know that they began early on to talk about hemp and to decide to set up that business. Ella actually was a raw vegan before she met Abraham, but apparently, according to the children, she would allow them to eat things like apples and cereals and things like that. Once Abraham came onto the scene, however, things became a lot more difficult for the children. He began to exert a great deal of control, as they said, in the relationship between himself and Ella, and he began to immediately almost assume control over the children, telling them what to do and punishing them when they didn't do as he told them. They claim, the children also have said, that their diets became much more restrictive, and they were hungry a lot of the time, which is how the episode happened at school, where they were discovered stealing food from other children, and the school began to intervene and first of all called social services, which earned the teacher who called social services a place on Ella's list. You can see how this is happening. Basically, anytime anyone offends them in any way, they go on the list. Now, the other thing that happened at the school, and we mentioned this in one of our very early videos, is that the parents at the school who would come and pick their children up did not always get along so well with Ella. She is kind of a strange individual. Her personality is a little bit hard to gauge. She can seem quite cold and quite indifferent, and quite self-obsessed in a lot of ways. She seems, very much more concerned with her own internal happiness than with the happiness of her children. For example, we've seen that in the time when after she left London and fled to Spain to avoid arrest. She seemed extremely cold and indifferent, and didn't seem to react in the way that a mother might be expected to react if her children had been taken from her, or if she had been forced to flee and then abandon them. So getting back to the school for a second, one of the things that we learned during Sabine McNeill's 2018 trial was that some of the parents at the school had slight run-ins with Ella. Strangely enough, guess whose kids got put on the list? And some of these run-ins had to do with Ella doing things like dropping kids off for play dates and saying she'd be back by 5 p.m. or whatever it happened to be, and not showing up until 9. Things like that. It's obviously not a capital offense to do that, but it does show a certain level of neglect, and I'm sure there was judgment happening there. People probably were not particularly fond of her, and yeah, she could be a very strange and kind of alienating person. Now, the other thing that happened when the children were being questioned by police, and we have the videos of those were unfortunately obtained by Ella and then released later by Sabine McNeill. When they were being interviewed by the police, they talked about their mother's role in what happened in Morocco. The police officer who was interviewing the children asked them very specifically what role their mother had played, and they basically said, our mother loves Abraham more than she loves us. She listens to him. She believes everything he says. And when he kicked us or hit us or poured water on us, she was there and she approved of it. So it seems unlikely that Abraham was alone in acting on this. It seems extremely likely that this was something that he was doing in concert with Ella. Getting back to the raw hemp stars business and our discussion about whether the abuse of the children was actually a part of a really sick and twisted campaign to create trauma-based mind control, which would then be allegedly alleviated by the use of hemp. There's an interesting photograph that Abraham and Ella took of one another in the cannabis fields, sort of standing, partially dressed amongst fields of cannabis, and it looks very, very, almost professionally done. It's almost like they were thinking that this might be something that they could use as part of their advertising campaign, if you think of it that way. We're not saying that that's exactly what happened, and it may be a completely wrong guess. However, it certainly does raise some interesting questions. So I think we'll leave it there for now. In our next video, we're going to talk about the Jean Clément audio recording, which was taken at Abraham's brother-in-law's house the night that Abraham and Ella brought the children back from Morocco. That audio is incredibly informative, and on our blog at hoaxteadresearch.com we do have the entire transcript of that audio recording, which should really be required reading for anyone who wants to know how this hoax went down. So I'll talk to you next time, and until then, take care. Bye now.